Happy 15th anniversary, I whispered sarcastically, staring at the security camera feed on my phone. There was my husband Daniel, stepping into the elevator of our downtown Seattle condo, with his secretary Vanessa clutched against him, her red lipstick smeared across his collar. The timestamp read 7:42 p.m., exactly 2 hours after he'd texted that an emergency client meeting would keep him working late on our anniversary. I wasn't even supposed to be watching. I'd only checked the feed because the security company had sent an alert about motion detection after hours. Now I knew why our anniversary dinner reservations at Canlis had been canceled. Now I understood why Dan had suggested we celebrate this weekend instead, with the practiced smile that had won over countless clients and, 15 years ago, had won over me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My story begins like many others, with trust, love, and the gradual erosion of both. I'm Rebecca Mitchell, though friends call me Becca. At 42, I'd built Emerald Interiors from a one-woman operation into Seattle's premier design firm for tech executives and real estate developers. I'd met Daniel during the early days of my career when I was designing the offices for his fledgling financial consulting business. He was brilliant with numbers, charismatic with clients, and had a work ethic that matched my own. Our courtship was a whirlwind of late-night conversations about our dreams, weekend trips to the San Juan Islands, and the shared vision of building something lasting together. We married after 18 months, merging our lives and our ambitions. For years, it worked beautifully. I designed our stunning lakefront home on Lake Washington while Dan grew Mitchell & Taylor Consulting into one of Seattle's most respected financial firms. We traveled extensively, collected art, hosted dinner parties for Seattle's business elite. From the outside, we were the perfect power couple. Successful, attractive, envied. The first hint of trouble came 3 years ago when Dan brought on Vanessa Porter as his executive assistant. At 32, Vanessa was a decade younger than me, with impeccable credentials, a Stanford MBA, and the kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. I'd noticed how she'd watch Dan during company functions, her eyes following him across the room with unconcealed admiration. But I'd dismissed it as professional respect. After all, Daniel was an impressive figure in Seattle's business community. She's ambitious, Dan had explained when I mentioned her intensity. Reminds me of you when we first met. The comparison should have been flattering, but something about it left me unsettled. Still, I trusted my husband. I believed in our marriage. And I was busy with my own growing business, securing contracts for major downtown renovations and launching a sustainable design initiative that had garnered national attention. The pandemic had temporarily slowed both our businesses, but as the world reopened, we emerged stronger than before. Dan was traveling more frequently. San Francisco, New York, Chicago, always with Vanessa to manage logistics. Their trips often extended over weekends for client development, leaving me to attend charity galas and friends' dinner parties alone. It's just how business works post-pandemic, Dan would say, kissing my forehead as he packed his weekend bag. Everyone's making up for lost time. I'd nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling in my chest. I'd convinced myself that this was the price of success, the natural evolution of a dual-career marriage. When my best friend Stephanie raised concerns over coffee at Rainy Day Cafe, I'd defended Dan vigorously. You don't understand the pressure he's under, I'd insisted. The competition in financial consulting is brutal right now. Stephanie had given me that look, the one that said she understood more than I was willing to admit. Just remember who you are, Becca. You built something remarkable on your own. Don't lose sight of that. I'd changed the subject, uncomfortable with the implications of her words. But as our 15th anniversary approached, I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. Dan was physically present less and less. And even when home, he was emotionally unreachable, constantly on his phone or locked in his home office on video calls. The passion that had once defined our relationship had faded to obligatory kisses and occasional distracted lovemaking. "Let's do something special for our anniversary," I'd suggested 3 weeks before the date. 15 years deserves a celebration. Dan had looked up from his phone briefly. "Absolutely. Book whatever you want. Just let Vanessa know the details so she can clear my calendar." I'd bristled at being told to coordinate through his secretary, but had swallowed my pride and made reservations at Canlis, the restaurant where we'd had our first date. I'd emailed Vanessa directly, and she'd responded with professional courtesy, assuring me the evening was blocked off. As our anniversary approached, I'd become increasingly excited. Perhaps this was what we needed. A reminder of our beginning. A chance to reconnect. I'd bought a new dress, scheduled a salon appointment, even written Dan a heartfelt card expressing my hopes for our next 15 years. The morning of our anniversary, Dan had kissed me goodbye, promising to meet me at the restaurant. "Looking forward to tonight," he'd said with what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm. I'd spent the day at a client meeting, then preparing at home. At 5:30 p.m., just as I was applying my lipstick, my phone had chimed with a text. "Emergency with Watson. Account. Can't make dinner. Will make it up to you this weekend. Order in and relax. Love you." My disappointment had been crushing, but not entirely surprising. This wasn't the first time Dan had canceled plans last minute. I'd called the restaurant to cancel, changed out of my dress, and opened a bottle of wine. It was while nursing my second glass that the security alert had popped up on my phone. Now, watching Dan and Vanessa stumble into our downtown pied-à-terre, the condo we maintained for late work nights or entertaining out-of-town clients, I felt strangely calm. The betrayal wasn't a shock. It was merely confirmation of a truth I'd been avoiding for months, perhaps years. They disappeared from the elevator camera view, but I knew our condo had no interior cameras, a privacy measure we'd both insisted on. I didn't need to see more. The Watson account emergency was clearly Vanessa, giggling in her black cocktail dress as Dan pressed her against the wall of the elevator. I set down my phone and walked slowly through our lakefront home, 6,000 square feet of custom, design that I'd poured my heart into. Every piece had been carefully selected. The handcrafted dining table where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, the living room sectional where we'd curled up watching films on rainy Seattle nights, the expansive primary bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington. This house represented 15 years of shared dreams, now revealed as an elaborate facade. In our home office, I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. With practiced efficiency, I logged into our shared cloud drive where we kept important documents, property, deeds, insurance policies, financial statements. As I scrolled through the files, a folder labeled Shoreline Development caught my attention. It wasn't a project I recognized, despite handling all our real estate investments. The folder contained documents for a waterfront property in the San Juan Islands, an exclusive area where we already owned a vacation cabin. This was a different property entirely, purchased just 8 months ago without my knowledge. The sale documents showed Daniel as the sole owner, not our usual joint ownership arrangement. The purchase price was staggering, even by Seattle's inflated real estate standards. More concerning were emails between Dan and Vanessa discussing the property, the renovations, the furnishings, the landscaping. "Our perfect getaway," Dan had written. "Can't wait to wake up next to you with that view." I felt the room tilt slightly, my breath catching. This wasn't just an affair. This was premeditated deception on a scale I hadn't imagined. I continued searching, methodically moving through folders, taking screenshots of anything relevant. What emerged was a pattern of financial manipulation dating back at least 2 years. Dan had been systematically diverting funds from our joint investments into separate accounts. He'd created an LLC with Vanessa listed as a partner. They'd purchased not just the island property, but also a luxury condo in downtown Phoenix. Apparently, their planned fresh start location, according to emails discussing the transition plan. Most devastating was a draft separation agreement, prepared by a law firm I didn't recognize. The terms were breathtaking in their audacity. Dan would retain majority ownership of our most valuable assets, citing his primary contribution to their acquisition. I would get the Lake Washington house, with its substantial mortgage, and a generous settlement that amounted to roughly 20% of our actual net worth. The document was dated 3 months ago, but had clearly gone through multiple revisions. The most recent version included notes about timing the filing for maximum advantage and minimizing community property claims. They were planning to blindside me with divorce papers, but only after Dan had secured his financial position. I picked up my phone and called Stephanie. Despite the late hour, she answered immediately. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Becca, everything okay? No, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But it will be. Can you come over? And can you bring Justin? Stephanie didn't ask questions. We'll be there in 30 minutes. I made one more call to Nick Rodriguez, a lawyer who had handled contracts for my business and had become a friend over the years. I need your help with an emergency situation, I explained. It involves potential financial fraud and a pending divorce. Nick's response was immediate and reassuring. Text me your address. I'll be there within the hour. While waiting, I methodically continued my investigation, discovering more evidence of financial manipulation. Dan had been skimming from our joint business investments, had taken out a substantial line of credit against the lake house without my knowledge, and had even borrowed funds from my design firm's accounts, signatures I couldn't recall signing, appearing on transfer authorizations. By the time Stephanie arrived with her brother Justin, I had assembled a substantial digital portfolio of Daniel's deception. Justin, a forensic accountant who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, took one look at my collection and whistled softly. He's been planning this for years, Justin said, scrolling through the documents. Classic case of dissipation of marital assets, but he's been sloppy. Leaving the digital trail accessible is amateur hour. He never thought I'd look, I explained. Financial management was his department. He's always handled the investments while I focused on growing my business. Classic mistake, Stephanie murmured, squeezing my hand. But you've caught him, and from what I'm seeing, you've caught him dead to rights. Nick arrived shortly after, bringing a professional calm to the increasingly tense atmosphere. After reviewing the evidence, he looked up at me with determined eyes. You have options, Rebecca, and more leverage than Daniel realizes. The question is, what do you want? I considered the question carefully. Despite the shock and betrayal, I felt surprisingly clear-headed. I want what's fair. I want to protect what I've built. And I want Daniel to understand that I'm not the passive bystander he apparently thinks I am. Nick nodded approvingly. Then we need to move quickly and strategically. First rule in these situations: secure your assets before confrontation. Once he knows you're aware, things will escalate rapidly. Justin was already typing rapidly on his laptop. I'm documenting everything, creating timestamps of when these documents were created and modified. I'm also tracking the money flows. We need to establish the full extent of the diversion before he can cover his tracks. Stephanie, always the practical one, asked the question hanging in the air. What about tonight? He's with her right now in your downtown condo. Are you going to confront him? I shook my head slowly, a plan taking shape. No, not yet. He thinks he has all the time in the world, that I'm sitting home alone nursing my disappointment over a canceled anniversary dinner. Let's use that assumption to our advantage. Nick smiled slightly. The element of surprise is powerful in these situations. What are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time to change the locks, I said, reaching for my phone, on all our properties. The next morning, I walked into my design studio with a newfound purpose. My team noticed immediately that something had changed. Perhaps it was my stride or the determined set of my shoulders. "Everything okay, Becca?" asked my assistant Maya, concern evident in her voice. "It will be," I replied with a confidence that surprised even me. "But I need you to clear my calendar for the next few days. We have some unexpected situations to manage." While my team adjusted schedules, I met with Linda Green, Daniel's former executive assistant who had mysteriously retired 6 months after Vanessa's arrival. Over coffee in my private office, Linda confirmed what I had begun to suspect. "She was undermining me from day one," Linda explained, anger still evident in her voice, "creating errors in my work, scheduling conflicts that made me look incompetent. When I tried to talk to Daniel about it, he suggested that perhaps I was feeling threatened by someone younger, after 20 years of loyal service. Did you suspect they were involved?" I asked carefully. Linda's bitter laugh was answer enough. "The Seattle Art Museum Gala, about 3 years ago. I saw them in a corner of the sculpture garden when everyone else was inside. It wasn't a professional conversation, I'll tell you that much." 3 years. The timeline staggered me. Our marriage had been compromised for 3 years while I'd been building my business, supporting Dan's career, maintaining our social obligations, and believing in our partnership. "I wanted to tell you," Linda admitted. "But who would you have believed? Your husband of 12 years or his disgruntled ex-assistant?" She was right, of course. I wouldn't have believed her then. I might not have been ready to see the truth. Back at my desk, I received confirmation that the locks had been changed. On all our properties, the Lake Washington house, the San Juan cabin, and 2 investment properties in Portland. I hadn't touched the downtown condo or the secret San Juan property yet. Those were part of Phase 2. Daniel texted at 11:30 a.m. "Crashed at Eric's after late client meeting. Heading to Portland for emergency consultation with Rainier Tech. Back tomorrow. Sorry about last night. We'll make it up to you this weekend." I replied with measured casualness. "No problem. Busy with the Mercer Island project anyway. Safe travels." The lie about Portland was interesting, perhaps covering for a planned day with Vanessa. I forwarded the text to Nick, who had set up a secure channel for our communications. His response was immediate. "Perfect. Gives us another 24 hours to prepare. Meeting at my office at 3 p.m. with the financial team." The meeting at Rodriguez and Associates was comprehensive. Justin had worked through the night and presented a detailed analysis of Daniel's financial manipulations. "The good news," Justin explained, "is that Washington is a community property state. Despite his efforts to separate assets, most of what he's acquired during your marriage is legally joint property." "The bad news," Nick countered, "is that he's created a complicated web of transactions designed to obscure the paper trail. Untangling it all will take time." "How much has he diverted?" I asked, bracing myself for the answer. Justin's expression was grim. "Conservatively, about $8 million. But there are offshore accounts we're still tracking." The figure was stunning, even given our comfortable financial position. $8 million secretly siphoned away while we still took vacations together, while Dan still brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, while we still discussed retirement plans and future dreams. "He's been transferring smaller amounts consistently for years," Justin continued. "But there's been a significant acceleration in the past 6 months. It appears they're preparing for some kind of deadline." "The San Juan property purchase suggests they're establishing a base," Nick added. "The Phoenix condo points to a potential relocation strategy. My guess? He's planning to leave within the next few months, probably after securing a major client that Eric and Walter don't know about." The pieces were falling into place. Dan's increased travel, his vague references to new market opportunities, his subtle suggestions that I might want to consider opening an Emerald Interiors branch in Phoenix. "So what's our next step?" I asked, looking around the table at my impromptu crisis team. "We've filed emergency temporary restraining orders to freeze the accounts we've identified," Nick explained. "That was this morning's priority. Now we need to secure documented evidence of the affair to strengthen the dissipation claims." Stephanie, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up. "What about Vanessa's friend Megan? She never liked how—" "Vanessa talked about you, Becca. She might be willing to provide some information." It was a good suggestion. Megan Walsh had always been coolly polite at company functions, maintaining a distance that I'd attributed to natural reserve. Perhaps there had been more to her discomfort. "I'll reach out to her," I agreed, "but discreetly. We can't risk Daniel getting wind of our investigation." As the meeting continued, we developed a comprehensive strategy. Justin would continue, tracking the financial trail. Nick would prepare divorce filings that countered the draft I'd discovered. Stephanie would help me document the contents of all our properties and secure my business records against potential sabotage. By 7 p.m., exhausted but resolute, I returned to the Lake Washington house. The newly installed security system recognized my biometrics, allowing me entry while logging my arrival. The house felt different now, no longer the warm, safe haven I'd designed, but a beautifully appointed crime scene where my marriage had been methodically murdered. I walked through each room, seeing it with new eyes. In Dan's home office, behind the framed Princeton diploma, I found a wall safe I hadn't known existed. The combination, our wedding date, yielded documents I hadn't discovered in my digital search. Ownership certificates for artwork purchased through a dealer in Vancouver, insurance policies for jewelry I'd never seen, and most tellingly, a recent appraisal for the engagement ring I wore daily. He had been preparing to ask for it back. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Portland meeting's running long. Staying overnight. Don't wait up tomorrow. We'll be late getting in." I responded with appropriate wifely concern. "Hope it goes well. House feels empty without you." The lie tasted bitter, but I reminded myself that this was strategic, maintaining the facade while we secured our position. Daniel had played the long game for years. I could manage it for a few days. That night, I slept in the guest room, unable to face the bed we'd shared for 15 years. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, my mind kept returning to a conversation from earlier that day. Nick's quiet question after everyone else had left his office. "Are you sure you want to do this, Rebecca? Once we move forward, there's no going back. No possibility of reconciliation." I'd looked at him steadily, feeling a certainty I hadn't expected. "There's already no going back, Nick. Daniel made that decision 3 years ago. He just didn't have the courage to tell me." Now, lying in the unfamiliar guest bed, I allowed myself a moment of grief for the marriage I'd thought I had, for the partner I'd believed in, for the future we'd planned together. Then I dried my tears and opened my laptop. We had work to do. The next morning brought confirmation that the temporary restraining orders had been granted. Daniel's secret accounts were frozen, the property transfers halted pending investigation. Nick had also secured orders preventing changes to our insurance policies and investment portfolios. It wouldn't stop Daniel entirely, but it would significantly complicate his plans. At 10 a.m., I met Megan Walsh at a small cafe in Ballard, far from Daniel's usual haunts. She arrived looking nervous but determined. "I've wanted to talk to you for over a year," she admitted, clutching her coffee cup. But Vanessa made it clear that my career would suffer if I interfered. The story Megan told filled in crucial gaps. Vanessa had pursued Daniel aggressively from her first day, positioning herself as essential to his success. The affair had begun during a business trip to Chicago 3 years ago and had continued unabated since. More disturbing were Vanessa's explicit statements about her plans. She calls you the placeholder, Megan said, unable to meet my eyes. Says you served your purpose helping build Daniel's reputation, but you're not the right partner for the next phase. She has it all mapped out, how they'll build their empire in Phoenix, away from Seattle's small-minded business community. When? I asked, my voice tight. When are they planning to make this move? Megan hesitated, then reached for her phone. She pulled up a text message from Vanessa dated just 2 weeks ago. Countdown begins. 75 days until freedom. Dee finalized the client contract today. Once it closes next month, we're golden. I forwarded the screenshot to Nick immediately. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Daniel had been negotiating a major contract, something he'd been uncharacteristically secretive about. Now I understood why. Is there anything else I should know? I asked Megan, who looked relieved to finally unburden herself. Just one thing, she said quietly. They've been using your downtown condo for their meetings for over 2 years. Vanessa has her own key. That explained why the security alert had triggered. Vanessa had used her key, but Daniel had needed to use the elevator code tied to our account, activating the motion alert. I thanked Megan for her courage and returned to my office, where Stephanie was helping document potential evidence. I shared Megan's revelations, watching my friend's expression shift from shock to anger. 75 days, Stephanie muttered. That would be right after the Thompson Group merger completes. Daniel's positioning himself to leave with major clients. The Thompson Group merger, another connection I hadn't made. Walter Thompson's financial services firm was merging with Mitchell & Taylor Consulting, a deal that would substantially increase the company's valuation. Daniel stood to make millions, which he clearly didn't intend to share with me. We need to accelerate our timeline, I decided, reaching for my phone to call Nick. Daniel's back tomorrow, and we need to be ready. The rest of the day passed, in a flurry of activity. Justin confirmed that he'd traced most of the missing funds, establishing clear evidence of financial misconduct. Nick prepared final versions of our legal filings, ready to submit the moment we gave the word. Stephanie helped me secure valuables and important documents from the house, transferring them to a secure location. By evening, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, but there was one more critical task. With the help of a private security firm Nick had recommended, I changed the locks and security codes on the downtown condo and installed hidden cameras in the common areas. If Daniel and Vanessa returned to their love nest, we'd have irrefutable evidence of the affair. That night, I prepared for Daniel's return. I arranged the master bedroom exactly as it had been when he left, placed fresh flowers in the entryway, and even prepared his favorite breakfast foods for the morning. To anyone looking in, I was simply a devoted wife awaiting her husband's return from a business trip. But upstairs, in the previously unused fifth bedroom, my suitcases were packed. The documents proving Daniel's betrayal were secured off-site, and a team of professionals was standing by, waiting for my signal. At 6:42 a.m., I heard Daniel's key in the front door. I remained in bed, eyes closed, listening to the familiar sounds of his return, briefcase set down in the entryway, shoes placed neatly on the rack, the soft creak of the kitchen floorboards as he moved to start the coffee machine. For 15 years, these sounds had represented comfort and security. Now they were merely the soundtrack to an elaborate performance. I counted to 300 before rising, slipping into my robe, and padding downstairs with practiced casualness. Daniel stood at the kitchen island, scrolling through emails on his phone, a pristine dress shirt already paired with his favorite charcoal suit pants. No signs of a rushed morning after a supposed late-night arrival from Portland. "You're home," I said, injecting warmth into my voice. "How was Portland?" Daniel looked up, his smile automatic. "Exhausting. The Rainier Tech situation is a mess, but I think we've got it stabilized." He crossed to kiss my cheek, and I forced myself not to recoil from the touch. Sorry about our anniversary. I was thinking maybe we could fly down to Napa this weekend. Make up for lost time? I smiled, accepting the coffee he offered. That sounds lovely, though I thought you had that strategy session with Walter on Saturday. A flicker of something, irritation, concern, crossed his face before disappearing into his practiced client-ready expression. Right, I forgot about that. Maybe the weekend after? I nodded agreeably. Whatever works with your schedule. I know how busy things are with the Thompson merger. Approaching. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. I'd rarely shown interest in the details of his business dealings, preferring to focus on my own company. This small deviation from script was enough to trigger his caution. How much do you know? About the merger? He asked, voice carefully neutral. I shrugged, turning to pour myself another coffee. Just what you've mentioned. Walter's firm brings the client base, yours brings the technical expertise. Should be a significant boost to the company's valuation. Daniel seemed to relax, his suspicion fading. Exactly, it's going to transform the business. Speaking of transformation, how's the Mercer Island project coming along? The comfortable pivot to my work, a reliable topic that usually absorbed my attention and diverted any potential scrutiny of his activities. I played along, chatting about the challenges of sourcing sustainable materials for the waterfront property renovation while observing him carefully. He was good, incredibly good, at maintaining the facade of interested husband. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have continued believing in this performance indefinitely. I should get going, Daniel said eventually, glancing at his watch. Early executive meeting about the Portland situation. Of course, I replied, rising to walk him to the door as I'd done countless mornings before. Dinner at home tonight? I could make that risotto you like. Perfect, he agreed, kissing me goodbye with the practiced affection of long marriage. Looking forward to it. As the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly. The first test had been passed. Daniel suspected nothing. I immediately texted Stephanie. Eagle has landed. Proceeding with Phase 2. Within 30 minutes, Stephanie arrived with Justin and 2 assistants from his accounting firm. We moved quickly, following the plan we'd established yesterday. While Justin's team began a comprehensive documentation of every item in the Lake Washington house, Stephanie and I drove to the office of Heather Wilson, the real estate agent who had handled most of our property purchases over the years. Heather greeted us warmly, though her eyes reflected concern. Rebecca, when you called yesterday, you sounded urgent. What can I help you with? I placed a folder on her desk. I need information about all properties purchased through your agency in the past 5 years in which Daniel Mitchell was involved, either as listed buyer or through any of his known business entities. Heather's professional smile faltered. That's quite a request. Normally, I'd need Daniel's authorization to release such information. I slid another document across the desk. The power of attorney Daniel had granted me 3 years ago, when he'd undergone minor surgery. In his confidence that I would never investigate his financial affairs, he'd never revoked it. This should address any concerns about authorization, I said quietly. Heather reviewed the document, then nodded slowly. I see. Give me a few minutes to pull the records. While she worked, Stephanie squeezed my hand supportively. You're doing great, Becca. Holding up okay? I nodded, surprised by my own composure. I keep waiting for the breakdown, the emotional collapse. But it hasn't come. I just feel focused. The anger is carrying you through, Stephanie observed. That's not a bad thing right now. Heather returned with a thick folder and an apologetic expression. Rebecca, I'm not sure what's going on, but there's something you should know. There are several properties here that were purchased without your knowledge, using funds from accounts I was told were joint assets. I'm aware, I replied calmly. That's exactly why I'm here. For the next hour, we reviewed the property. Documents. Beyond the San Juan waterfront property and Phoenix condo I'd already discovered, there were 3 additional properties: a ski cabin in Whistler, a small apartment in San Francisco, and most surprisingly, a historic brownstone in Chicago purchased just 3 months ago. The Chicago property was handled differently, Heather explained, pointing to the documentation. It was purchased through an LLC called Porter Ventures. The contact person was a Vanessa Porter, but the funding came from an account linked to Daniel. Porter Ventures. The blatant use of Vanessa's name suggested a confidence bordering on arrogance, a belief that I would never discover these transactions, or perhaps that by the time I did, it would be too late to challenge them. "I need copies of everything," I said, maintaining my professional demeanor despite the growing knot of anger in my chest. "And Heather, I'd appreciate your discretion about this meeting." Heather nodded solemnly. "Of course. Rebecca, I've worked with you both for years. If there's anything else I can do." "Actually, there is," I said, an idea forming. "The San Juan property on West Side Road. I'd like to schedule a viewing this afternoon. Can you arrange that with the caretaker?" By noon, Stephanie and I were on the ferry to San Juan Island, copies of all property documents secured in my briefcase. I'd received updates from Justin, inventory of the Lake Washington house proceeding smoothly. Nick, legal filings ready to be submitted, and most, interestingly, from the security company monitoring the downtown condo, movement detected at 11:15 a.m., read the text. 2 individuals entered using personal access code. Video feed available on secure server. I accessed the feed using my phone, Stephanie watching over my shoulder. The footage was crystal clear. Daniel and Vanessa entering the condo, his hand possessively at the small of her back. They moved immediately to the kitchen, where Daniel opened champagne while Vanessa perched on the counter, her skirt riding up as she pulled him between her legs for a kiss. "The Portland emergency, I presume?" Stephanie muttered darkly. I forwarded the video link to Nick with a brief message. "Additional evidence for the filing. Timestamp verified." The ferry journey gave us time to review the property documents more thoroughly. What emerged was a clear pattern of asset diversion using increasingly sophisticated methods. The early purchases, the Phoenix condo and Whistler cabin, had been made with minimal attempt at concealment, simply keeping me uninformed. The later acquisitions showed greater efforts at obscuring the paper trail, using LLCs and offshore funding mechanisms. "He got bolder over time," Stephanie observed. "When you didn't question the financial arrangements, he took it as permission to escalate." "I trusted him," I said simply. Financial management was his area of expertise. I focused on growing my business and maintaining our home. "The classic division that sets women up for exactly this situation," Stephanie replied, her voice bitter. "My mother went through the same thing with my father. Different generation, same playbook." We arrived at San Juan Island just after 2 p.m. Heather had arranged for the caretaker to meet us at the property, a stunning contemporary structure perched on a cliff overlooking the Harrow Strait. As we drove up the winding driveway, the house came into view. Floor-to-ceiling windows, cedar siding, expansive decks cascading down toward the water. It was breathtaking and achingly familiar. "This is your design," Stephanie gasped, recognizing the architectural elements. "This is the concept you created for your dream retirement home." She was right. 3 years ago, I'd sketched plans for our someday home, the place where Daniel and I would eventually settle when we stepped back from our businesses. I'd shared those designs with him, and he'd enthusiastically endorsed them, suggesting we start looking for the perfect waterfront property to build on in a few years. Now here it stood, my dream made real, but built for him and Vanessa. The caretaker, a weathered islander named Roy, greeted us with casual friendliness. "Mrs. Mitchell? Heather said you'd be stopping by." Mr. Mitchell was just here last weekend, making sure everything was ready for the summer. Yes, my husband is very thorough, I replied, maintaining my composure with effort. Would you mind showing us around? I'd like to see what progress has been made since my last visit. Roy looked momentarily confused. Clearly, he'd never seen me before, but recovered quickly. Of course, ma'am. Happy to give you the tour. The interior was even more devastating than the exterior. Every detail reflected my personal aesthetic, from the reclaimed wood beams to the custom stonework in the kitchen. The furniture pieces were high-end versions of items I'd collected in my design portfolios over the years. In the primary bedroom, the massive emperor bed-faced windows overlooking the strait, positioned to catch both sunrise and sunset views, exactly as I'd specified in my sketches. Mr. Mitchell said the lady of the house has excellent taste, Roy commented, showing us the custom closet system in the primary suite. Said every detail had to be just so. I managed a tight smile. Did he happen to mention when they plan to use the property next? Matter of fact, he did, Roy replied. Said they'd be here for a long weekend starting this Friday. Asked me to stock the kitchen and make sure the hot tub was serviced. Friday, tomorrow. Daniel had made no mention of weekend plans during our morning conversation. This must be the real reason he'd suggested Napa next weekend instead. He and Vanessa had already planned their own anniversary celebration in the house designed from my dreams. After completing the tour, we thanked Roy and returned to the car. Once out of earshot, Stephanie turned to me, her expression a mixture of rage and concern. "That absolute bastard," she hissed. "He stole your designs, Becca. He built your dream house for his mistress." I stared back at the beautiful house gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Not for his mistress," I corrected quietly. "For his future. That house isn't a love nest. It's a foundation for the life he's planning after leaving me." The revelation solidified something within me. Until now, part of me had still been processing the betrayal as primarily emotional. An affair, a midlife crisis, a temporary madness. But the house made Daniel's intentions unmistakable. This was calculated, long-term planning. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was methodically replacing me with a newer version, using my own designs to create the perfect setting for his second act. "I need to make a call," I said, pulling out my phone. Nick answered immediately. "Rebecca, I was just about to call you. We've reviewed the condo footage. It's definitive evidence of the affair. We're ready to file whenever you give the word." "File today," I said, my decision crystallizing. "And Nick, I need something else. I need to own this house." There was a brief pause before he replied. "The San Juan property? That's going to be complicated given how he structured the purchase." "I don't care how complicated it is," I said, firmly. "This house was built from my designs. It represents years of my creative work. I want it secured before Daniel and Vanessa arrive for their romantic weekend tomorrow." "Let me talk to the judge who issued the restraining orders," Nicky said, his voice shifting into strategic mode. "Given the evidence of financial misconduct and the fact that the designs originated with you, we might be able to get an emergency injunction preventing their use of the property pending final asset division." "Perfect," I replied. "And Nick, I want to be here when they arrive." "Rebecca." His tone carried a warning. Direct confrontation at this stage might complicate the legal proceedings. "I'm not planning a confrontation," I clarified. "Just a presence. They need to understand that I'm not the passive bystander they've assumed me to be." After ending the call, I turned to Stephanie. "Change of plans. We're staying on the island tonight." Stephanie nodded, no questions asked. "The inn in Friday? Harbor? Or should I see if there's an Airbnb closer to here?" "Neither," I replied, starting the car. "We're staying right here." "In the house?" Stephanie looked shocked. Is that legal? As of an hour from now, this property will be under dispute in court, with an injunction preventing either party from claiming exclusive access, I explained, which means I have as much right to be here as Daniel does. We drove into town to gather supplies, groceries, wine, and overnight necessities. While Stephanie handled the shopping, I called Justin for an update. The Lake Washington house inventory is complete, he reported. We've documented everything, including the contents of the wall safe. The team is now working on financial records. There's a significant discrepancy between the tax returns you provided and what appears to have been actually filed. Tax fraud? I asked, not entirely surprised, but still taken aback by the scope of Daniel's deception. Potentially, Justin confirmed. We've found evidence that certain business expenses claimed on your joint returns were actually personal expenditures related to the properties you didn't know about. Vacation travel disguised as business trips, furnishings for the Chicago brownstone classified as office equipment. The web of lies kept expanding, each thread leading to new discoveries. I updated Justin on our plan to stay at the San Juan property, arranging for one of his associates to join us with documentation equipment. If we were taking a stand at the house, we needed to properly inventory everything inside. By the time we returned to the property, Nick had called with confirmation. The emergency injunction had been granted. The San Juan house was officially off limits to both Daniel and Vanessa pending court review of the contested assets. A process server was already en route to Daniel's office to deliver the legal notices. Perfect timing, I remarked as we unloaded the groceries. He'll receive the papers just as he's preparing to leave for his romantic weekend. We settled into the house, the surreal nature of the situation not lost on me. I was essentially a guest in the physical manifestation of my own creative vision, a house I had designed but never seen, filled with furnishings I had conceptualized but never selected. Moving through the spaces felt like walking through an alternate reality where my life had taken a different path. In the primary bedroom, I opened the closet to find women's clothing already hanging, size 4, designer labels, primarily in jewel tones that would complement Vanessa's coloring. The adjoining bathroom contained her preferred skincare products, arranged with meticulous precision. She had already begun moving in, staking her claim to the future she and Daniel had planned. I took photos of everything, forwarding them to Nick as additional evidence. Then, with Stephanie's help, I packed all of Vanessa's belongings into the suitcases we found stored in the guest room closet. We placed them neatly in the garage, alongside Daniel's golf clubs and the expensive mountain bikes hanging on the wall. "What now?" Stephanie asked as we finished a simple dinner on the deck, watching the sunset paint the strait in vibrant oranges and pinks. "Now we wait," I replied, sipping my wine and feeling strangely peaceful despite the circumstances. Daniel will have received the legal notifications by now. He'll be scrambling to understand how I discovered everything, trying to contact his lawyer, possibly even attempting to reach Vanessa to warn her. "Won't he just call you directly?" I shook my head. "Not yet. His first instinct will be damage, control on his own terms. He needs to understand the situation before confronting me." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Nick. Legal notices delivered to Daniel Mitchell at 5:42 p.m. He appeared visibly shaken, but did not comment. His assistant confirmed he canceled all remaining meetings and left the office immediately. Afterward, I forwarded the message to Stephanie. And so it begins. Sure enough, my phone began ringing 15 minutes later, Daniel's face appearing on the screen. I declined the call. He immediately tried again. I declined again. A text followed. "Becca, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Please call me." I didn't respond. 5 minutes later, another text. "Whatever you think is happening, it's not what it seems. I can explain everything. Please answer your phone." The desperate tone gave me a grim satisfaction. Daniel was experiencing what I had felt that morning after our anniversary. The disorienting shock of discovering that the reality you thought you were living was actually an elaborate facade. "Aren't you going to respond?" Stephanie asked, as my phone continued to light up with calls and messages. "Not tonight," I replied calmly. "Tonight is about reclaiming space, physical and emotional. Daniel has controlled the narrative of our marriage for years. Now it's my turn." We spent the evening exploring the house more thoroughly, discovering thoughtful design details that reflected my aesthetic. The reading nook positioned to capture morning light, the office with built-in bookshelves sized perfectly for Daniel's collection of financial history volumes, the kitchen layout optimized for entertaining. "You know what's strange?" I mused as we sat in the great room, fire crackling in the custom stone fireplace. "Despite everything, I still love this house. It's exactly what I would have created for us." "Then maybe it should be yours," Stephanie suggested. "Not as a reminder of Daniel's betrayal, but as a reclamation of your vision." The idea resonated. This house, born from my creativity but corrupted by deception, could be transformed again. Not into the retirement dream Daniel and I had discussed, but into something new. A sanctuary, of my own perhaps, or a retreat center for women rebuilding their lives after similar betrayals. Around midnight, as Stephanie slept in the guest room, I stood on the deck watching moonlight shimmer across the water. My phone had finally stopped buzzing with Daniel's attempts to contact me. In their place came a single text from an unknown number. "This is Vanessa. We need to talk before this goes any further. There are things you don't understand." I studied the message, recognizing the manipulative tactic. "Things you don't understand" was classic gaslighting, suggesting that I was missing key information that would somehow justify their actions. As if any revelation could explain away 3 years of systematic deception. I didn't respond, instead, sending a brief update to Nick. "Vanessa has made contact. Proceeding as planned." In the moonlight, I could see a small boat moving across the strait, navigational lights blinking steadily as it followed its predetermined course. For years, I had been like that boat, moving forward along a path I believed was charted by mutual agreement, unaware that the map had been altered without my knowledge. No more. From this moment forward, I would chart my own course. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Justin's associate arrived early to document the house contents, while Nick called with updates on the legal proceedings. "The judge was particularly interested in the evidence that your design work was used without attribution or compensation," Nick explained. "It strengthens our position regarding intellectual property claims in the divorce settlement." My phone continued to accumulate. Messages from Daniel, the tone shifting from conciliatory to increasingly desperate. "Becca, please. At least give me a chance to explain." "Where are you? I came home and you're not here. We need to talk." "I know I've made mistakes, but it's not what you think. Please call me." And finally, around 9 a.m., "My lawyer says you filed for divorce. Why would you do this without talking to me first? This isn't like you." That last message nearly made me laugh out loud. This isn't like you. Daniel had grown so accustomed to my accommodating nature, my willingness to accept his explanations and adjust my expectations to fit his needs, that my independent action seemed inconceivable to him. Stephanie, reviewing the messages over breakfast, snorted derisively. "He really believed you'd confront him directly, giving him the chance to spin some story that you'd ultimately accept because the alternative was too painful to contemplate." That was the pattern, I acknowledged. For years, I chose to believe his explanations rather than trust my instincts. Not this time. As we finished breakfast, Nick called again with crucial information. "Rebecca, our investigator has confirmed that Daniel withdrew $50,000 in cash yesterday afternoon, shortly after receiving the legal notices. He also booked a private charter flight from Seattle to Vancouver scheduled for 2 p.m. today. My pulse quickened. He's planning to run. It appears so, Nick confirmed. We've notified the court and updated the financial restraining orders to specifically prohibit international travel, but enforcement is challenging on short notice. What about Vanessa? I asked. Any movement on her end? Her assistant reported she called in sick today. First time in 3 years, apparently. Her phone location shows she's at her apartment, but she's been making calls to various airlines. The pieces were falling into place. Daniel and Vanessa were planning to flee, likely to an offshore location where some portion of the hidden assets had been transferred. The confrontation I'd anticipated for tomorrow was actually accelerating toward today. Nick, I need the San Juan Island police notified about the injunction, I said, making a quick decision. If Daniel attempts to access this property today, they need to be prepared to enforce the court order. While Nick handled the legal notifications, I called Roy, the caretaker. Roy, this is Rebecca Mitchell. There's been a change of plans. Mr. Mitchell won't be coming to the property this weekend after all. Oh? Roy sounded surprised. That's odd. He just called asking me to prepare the boat for a noon departure, said there was some kind of emergency. The boat? I'd forgotten about the 38-foot cabin cruiser Daniel had purchased last summer, ostensibly for entertaining clients but clearly intended as part of the San Juan lifestyle he'd been constructing. With a range of over 300 miles, it could easily reach Canadian waters. Roy, where's the boat docked? I asked urgently. Mitchell's Bay Marina, just down the hill from the property. Slip 22. I thanked him and immediately relayed this information to Nick, who promised to contact the Coast Guard and Border Patrol. But I knew bureaucratic wheels turned slowly, perhaps too slowly to prevent Daniel from escaping with who knew how much in undocumented assets. We need to get to the marina, I told Stephanie, already grabbing my jacket. What's the plan? She asked, following me to the car. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. But I know I can't just sit here while Daniel sails away with my future. The drive to Mitchell's Bay Marina took less than 10 minutes. As we pulled into the parking area, I spotted Daniel's Tesla already there. He had somehow reached the island without returning to the Lake Washington house where our security system would have alerted us. He must have gone straight from the office to the ferry yesterday, Stephanie reasoned as we parked several spaces away. Probably stayed in town overnight. We moved cautiously toward the docks, keeping out of sight behind the harbor master's office. From this vantage point, we could see Slip 22, where the gleaming white Fairline squadron, aptly named New Horizons, was being prepared for departure. Daniel moved purposefully around the deck, stowing gear and checking systems, while Vanessa stood on the dock beside several large suitcases and duffel bags. I count at least 6 bags, Stephanie whispered. They're not planning a weekend getaway, they're running. I nodded, taking photos with my phone and sending them directly to Nick with a brief message. Evidence of flight attempt. At Mitchell's Bay Marina now. Authorities needed ASAP. We watched as Daniel helped Vanessa aboard, then began loading the luggage. Their body language was tense, movements hurried and lacking their usual fluid coordination. They were scared, and scared people made mistakes. We need to stall them, I murmured. The Coast Guard won't get here in time. Just then, my phone rang. Nick again. Rebecca, where exactly are you? He asked urgently. Watching them load the boat, I replied quietly. They're preparing to leave. The sheriff is en route, but he's coming from Friday Harbor. ETA. 15 minutes at best. Too long, I said. They'll be gone in 5. I ended the call and turned to Stephanie. I need a distraction. Something that will delay their departure without alerting them to our presence. Stephanie thought for a moment, then grinned. I have just the thing. Give me 2 minutes. She disappeared toward the harbor master's office while I continued documenting Daniel and Vanessa's activities. They had finished loading the luggage and were now reviewing what appeared to be navigational charts spread across the boat's cockpit table. Daniel pointed toward the north, likely indicating their planned route to Canadian waters. Suddenly, the marina's public address system crackled. To life. Attention all vessels in Mitchell's Bay Marina. This is an emergency notification. Border Patrol and Coast Guard vessels are conducting safety inspections of all departing craft today. Please have all documentation ready for inspection before attempting to leave the marina. Repeat, this is a mandatory inspection for all departing vessels. The effect on Daniel and Vanessa was immediate and dramatic. They froze, exchanging panicked glances. Daniel quickly folded the charts while Vanessa moved to the cabin, presumably to secure whatever they didn't want inspected. Stephanie returned, looking pleased with herself. Harbor Master was very understanding once I explained the situation. He's a friend of Roy's, apparently. Brilliant, I whispered. That should buy us the time we need. We watched as Daniel and Vanessa conferred urgently on the deck. Their original plan clearly derailed. They appeared to be formulating alternatives. After several minutes, Daniel nodded decisively and began unloading some of the luggage, while Vanessa made a phone call. They're changing strategies, I observed, probably arranging another escape route. Sure enough, within minutes a water taxi approached the marina from the direction of Friday Harbor. Daniel flagged it down, loading Vanessa and several of the smaller bags aboard while keeping the larger luggage on the yacht. They're splitting up, Stephanie realized. Vanessa's leaving while Daniel creates a diversion with the boat. I quickly texted Nick this development, including photos of the water taxi and its registration number. As we watched, Daniel kissed Vanessa goodbye, a brief, tense exchange lacking any real affection, before she departed on the water taxi heading south. Daniel returned to preparing the yacht, his movements now more measured, less frantic. He was adapting, implementing what was likely a pre-arranged contingency plan. Just then, the unmistakable sound of sirens approached from the marina entrance. A San Juan County Sheriff's vehicle pulled into the parking area, followed closely by an unmarked sedan. Perfect timing, I murmured as two uniformed officers and a man in a suit emerged from the vehicles. Daniel, hearing the sirens, looked up from the yacht. From our position, I could see the exact moment he spotted the officers walking purposefully toward the dock. His shoulders slumped momentarily before he straightened, adjusting his expression to one of confused innocence. "Showtime," Stephanie whispered. We remained hidden, watching as the officers approached Daniel and presented what appeared to be court documents. The man in the suit, likely a representative from Nick's office, gestured toward the luggage still piled on the deck of the yacht. Daniel's voice carried across the water, his tone indignant. "This is ridiculous. I'm simply taking my boat out for the weekend. There's been a misunderstanding with my wife." The sheriff responded too quietly to hear, but his firm headshake suggested he wasn't accepting Daniel's explanation. When he pointed toward the private dock attached to the San Juan house visible on the bluff above, Daniel's posture stiffened. "Let's move," I said to Stephanie. "I want to hear this conversation." We approached openly now, walking down the dock toward the growing confrontation. Daniel spotted us when we were about halfway there, his expression shifting from carefully controlled indignation to genuine shock. "Becca!" The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. "What are you doing here?" I stopped a few feet away, maintaining a calm, professional demeanor. "I was about to ask you the same question, Daniel. I thought you had meetings in Seattle today." The sheriff looked between us with interest, while the man in the suit, who introduced himself as Alan Parker from Nick's office, handed me a copy of the court documents. "Mrs. Mitchell, as you can see, the injunction has been served and is being enforced," Alan explained. "Your husband's attempt to remove personal property from the disputed real estate has been documented and will be included in our filing tomorrow. Daniel stared at me, his composure cracking. When did you find out? I finished for him. About the affair? The hidden properties? The diverted funds? The plans to leave me financially devastated while you started over with Vanessa? I smiled thinly. Happy anniversary to me, I suppose. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The security alert, the condo. I nodded. Careless of you to use your access code when Vanessa already had a key, but then you've been getting increasingly careless, haven't you? The San Juan property purchase in your name only. The Porter Ventures LLC for the Chicago brownstone. I gestured toward the house on the bluff. Building my dream home design for another woman. Daniel seemed to age before my eyes, the carefully maintained facade of successful, confident businessman crumbling to reveal the desperate, cornered man beneath. Mrs. Mitchell, the sheriff interjected, would you like to press charges regarding the attempted removal of assets in violation of the court order? I considered Daniel, the man I had loved and trusted for 15 years, now revealed as a stranger. That won't be necessary, Sheriff, I replied calmly. The documentation of the attempt is sufficient for now. I believe Mr. Mitchell will be more cooperative moving forward, knowing that his actions are being monitored. Daniel's relief was palpable but short-lived. However, I continued, I would like a full inventory of everything on this boat, particularly the contents of those duffel bags. I have reason to believe they may contain financial instruments or other valuables being removed in violation of the asset freeze. The sheriff nodded, signaling to his deputy to begin the inventory. Daniel watched helplessly as they began methodically documenting and photographing the yacht's contents. Where is Vanessa going? I asked Daniel directly, my tone conversational despite the circumstances. He hesitated, clearly calculating his response. I don't know what you're talking about. The woman who just left on the water taxi, I clarified, showing him the photos on my phone. Your secretary, your lover, your partner in financial fraud. Where was she heading? Daniel's jaw tightened. This is absurd. You've completely misinterpreted. Save it for your lawyer, I interrupted, suddenly tired of the lies. Everything is documented, Daniel. The affair, the hidden properties, the diverted funds, the tax fraud. Vanessa has already been served with legal papers naming her as co-respondent in the divorce and a party to the financial misconduct claims. This was a bluff. Vanessa hadn't actually been served yet, but the flash of panic in Daniel's eyes confirmed my suspicion that their separation at the marina wasn't just a tactical decision. He was cutting her loose, implementing a self-preservation strategy that likely involved her taking the blame for the more egregious financial maneuvers. You can't possibly understand what's really happening, Daniel attempted, lowering his voice and stepping closer, attempting to establish the intimate connection that had worked so effectively in the past. Becca, you have to let me explain. 15 years of marriage deserves at least a conversation. I met his gaze steadily. I agree. 15 years deserved honesty, respect, and loyalty. You provided none of those things. The sheriff approached with a preliminary inventory. Mrs. Mitchell, we found approximately $200,000 in cash and several bearer bonds in the duffel bags, along with passports, including some with Mr. Mitchell's photo but different names. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, his carefully constructed escape plan disintegrating around him. I turned to Alan. Please ensure everything is photographed and secured as evidence. As the officers continued their work, I finally allowed myself to really look at Daniel, to see not the successful businessman, not the charming husband, but the man who had systematically betrayed every aspect of our marriage while planning his escape. Why? I asked simply. Was it worth it? For a moment, genuine emotion crossed his face. Not remorse, exactly, but a flicker of recognition that something valuable had been irretrievably lost. It wasn't supposed to end this way, he said quietly. No, I agreed. It wasn't. I turned away, walking back down the dock with Stephanie beside me. Behind us, the sheriff continued the inventory while Daniel stood watching, his escape thwarted. His carefully constructed future suddenly evaporated like morning mist over the strait. "You okay?" Stephanie asked as we reached the car. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool island air fill my lungs. Actually, yes. For the first time in a very long time, I think I am. The next 48 hours passed in a whirlwind of legal meetings, financial discoveries, and unexpected revelations. After Daniel's failed escape attempt, Nick had successfully petitioned the court for a comprehensive asset freeze, effectively paralyzing Daniel's access to any accounts or properties connected to our marriage or his business ventures. I watched Seattle's evening skyline from Nick's downtown office, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows as financial experts and legal advisors discussed strategy around the conference table behind me. The mood was focused, but triumphant. Daniel's attempted flight had transformed what might have been a contentious but relatively standard high-asset divorce into something approaching a criminal investigation. The bearer bonds are particularly problematic for Daniel, Justin explained, spreading documents across the polished mahogany. They're unregistered, essentially untraceable once cashed, and he can't explain their origin. The amount exceeds the threshold for mandatory reporting. Nick nodded, making notes. Tax evasion, wire fraud, possibly even money laundering depending on how these were acquired. The IRS and SEC will both want to talk to him. I turned from the window. "Has there been any contact from Vanessa?" Stephanie checked her phone. "Nothing since she tried to call you this morning. Our investigator tracked her to Victoria, British Columbia. She checked into the Empress Hotel last night under her own name, which seems unusually careless." "Or deliberate," Nick suggested. "She might be establishing an alibi, creating distance between herself and Daniel now that everything's unraveling." I considered this. "What about the Chicago property? Any movement there?" Justin consulted his laptop. "The management company reports someone accessed the brownstone yesterday using the key code, but the security cameras were disabled. They've implemented the court-ordered lock changes this morning." The Chicago property remained particularly mysterious, purchased through Vanessa's LLC but furnished with items that matched Daniel's taste rather than hers. The location made little sense for either of them, with no apparent business or personal connections to the city beyond occasional conferences. "I still don't understand Chicago," I mused aloud. Daniel rarely traveled there, and when he did, it was never for more than a day or two. Nick exchanged glances with Justin. "We may have some insight on that. Our investigator found something interesting." He slid a folder across the table to me. "Tax records for a Melody Porter, resident of Chicago's Gold Coast neighborhood." "Porter?" I opened the folder. "Any relation to Vanessa?" "Her mother," Nick confirmed. "Divorced from Vanessa's father 20 years ago, remarried twice since then. Currently separated from husband number 3 and living primarily in Chicago." The connection clicked. So the brownstone wasn't for Daniel and Vanessa. It was for her mother. "Appears that way," Justin agreed. "Property taxes, utilities, even grocery deliveries are being automatically paid from one of the accounts Daniel established with diverted funds." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Vanessa hadn't just been securing her future with Daniel, she'd been taking care of her family as well. The scope of their planning was impressive in its audacity, creating an entirely new life infrastructure while systematically dismantling the old one. "What about Walter Thompson and the firm?" I asked, shifting focus to Daniel's business partner. "Has he responded to the notification?" Nick's expression turned grim. "That's our next challenge. Walter claims no knowledge of Daniel's financial improprieties, but he's concerned about potential liability for the firm. He's requested a meeting tomorrow morning." "I'd like to attend," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Stephanie looked concerned. "Are you sure that's wise?" Walter and Daniel have been partners for over a decade. His loyalty might not be where you'd hope. Exactly why I need to be there, I replied. I need to understand if Walter was complicit or merely another victim of Daniel's deceptions. Nick considered for a moment, then nodded. It could be beneficial, actually. Walter might be more forthcoming with you present. Just remember, anything you say could potentially be used in subsequent proceedings. Our meeting continued late into the evening, each new revelation adding to the complex picture of Daniel's betrayal. The financial trail suggested he'd been planning his exit for at least 3 years, gradually establishing separate accounts, transferring assets into shell companies, and creating the infrastructure for his post-marriage life. It's like watching someone build an escape pod in slow motion, Stephanie remarked as we finally left Nick's office around midnight. While I paid for the materials, I added bitterly. The drizzle had intensified into steady rain, transforming Seattle's streets into glistening mirrors reflecting the cityscape. My driver Carlos waited patiently outside, holding an umbrella as we approached. "Home, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked, opening the car door. I hesitated. The Lake Washington house no longer felt like home. Too many memories, too many lies lived within its carefully designed spaces. "No, Carlos. The downtown apartment, please." Stephanie raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She understood my reluctance to return to the house I'd shared with Daniel. While I had legal claim to both properties during the divorce proceedings, the emotional landscape was more complicated. The apartment, a sleek 2-bedroom overlooking Elliott Bay that I'd maintained as an occasional workspace for late client meetings, offered neutral territory. Daniel had rarely visited, preferring our lake house or his downtown office for work-related discussions. Carlos navigated the late-night traffic with practiced ease while Stephanie and I sat in comfortable silence, both processing the day's revelations. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel, his 5th unanswered message today. "Becca, please talk to me. I know you're hurt and angry, but there are facts you don't have. Walter has nothing to do with this. Don't punish him for my mistakes." The message revealed Daniel's greatest fear wasn't losing me or even facing legal consequences. It was the potential collapse of his business reputation. After 15 years together, I recognized the subtle manipulation, the attempt to position himself as protecting others rather than scrambling to salvage his own interests. "Another plea from Daniel?" Stephanie asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the message. "He's worried about tomorrow's meeting with Walter." "As he should be," she replied. "If Walter decides to cooperate fully with the investigation, Daniel's professional reputation is finished." At the apartment, Stephanie helped me settle in, ordering late-night takeout while I showered and changed. The space felt welcomingly impersonal. No shared memories, no carefully selected artwork commemorating anniversaries or special occasions. Just clean lines, practical furnishings, and blessed anonymity. "You know," Stephanie said as we ate Thai, food directly from the containers, "I never understood why you kept this place. Now it seems prescient." I twirled noodles around my fork. I kept it because Daniel never quite understood my design business. He saw the glamorous client presentations and magazine features, but not the late nights, the vendor emergencies, the on-site problems that needed immediate solutions. I gestured around the apartment. This gave me a professional base that was just mine. "Your own escape pod," Stephanie observed with a small smile. "I suppose so," I agreed, though I never expected to need it for this purpose. After Stephanie left, I wandered through the apartment, noting with fresh perspective how the space reflected aspects of myself that had existed independent of my marriage. The bookshelves held design volumes and architectural references that had shaped my aesthetic vision long before I met Daniel. The small balcony garden contained plants chosen for their resilience and adaptability rather than showy beauty. I'd created this space entirely on my own, without Daniel's input or financial contribution. Perhaps some subconscious part of me had always recognized the need for autonomy, for a sanctuary that existed outside our shared narrative. My phone buzzed again, not Daniel this time, but an email notification from Linda Green, Daniel's former executive assistant. Rebecca, I've been following the news about Daniel's situation. There's information you should have that might be relevant to your case. Can we meet privately? I don't feel comfortable putting this in writing. The message was time-stamped 11:42 p.m., late for someone as traditionally structured as Linda. Whatever information she had must be significant enough to disrupt her routine. I responded immediately. Available tomorrow afternoon at 3 downtown apartment, address to follow in the morning. Thank you, Linda. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with fragmented images. Daniel and Vanessa laughing in our San Juan house, Walter Thompson shredding documents, Melody Porter standing in a Chicago brownstone filled with my design concepts. I woke at dawn feeling drained yet hyper-alert, my mind racing with possibilities and contingencies. The meeting with Walter Thompson was scheduled for 9 a.m. at Mitchell & Taylor Consulting's downtown offices. I dressed with deliberate care, a charcoal Armani suit that conveyed professional authority without ostentation, paired with subtle jewelry and minimal makeup. The armor of a businesswoman, not a betrayed wife. Nick met me in the lobby, briefcase in hand, his expression revealing nothing. Walters agreed to meet without legal representation present, though he reserves the right to end the conversation if he feels uncomfortable. His exact words were as a courtesy to Rebecca, who's always been supportive of the firm. Interesting framing, I remarked as we rode the elevator to the 23rd floor, positioning me as an adjunct supporter rather than an active participant in the firm's success. Men like Walter and Daniel often categorize women that way, Nick observed. It's going to work against them in this situation. The elevator doors opened directly into the Mitchell & Taylor reception area, a space I'd designed 5 years ago when the firm expanded. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly at my appearance, but maintained professional composure. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Thompson is waiting in the conference room. May I offer you coffee or water? I declined politely, noting the subtle shift in the young woman's demeanor, a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. News of Daniel's situation had clearly circulated among the staff, creating the awkward atmosphere that surrounds workplace scandal. Walter Thompson rose as we entered the conference room, extending his hand with practiced cordiality. At 62, Walter maintained the trim physique and confident bearing of a former collegiate rower. His silver hair and conservative suits projected reliable trustworthiness, the embodiment of Seattle's old guard financial establishment. Rebecca, thank you for coming, he said, his baritone carrying the faint remnants of his Boston upbringing. I wish the circumstances were different. So do I, Walter, I replied, taking a seat across from him. But here we are. Walter nodded gravely, then turned to Nick. Before we begin, I want to emphasize that I had no knowledge of Daniel's personal financial arrangements or his relationship with Ms. Porter beyond a professional capacity. Nick placed his briefcase on the table. With respect, Mr. Thompson, that's what we're here to determine. Walter's expression tightened momentarily before he regained his composure. Of course, I understand the need for clarity. Where would you like to start? For the next hour, we methodically walked Walter through the evidence of Daniel's financial misconduct, focusing particularly on client funds and company resources. Walter listened attentively, occasionally requesting clarification, but offering no defense of his partner's actions. The Rainier Tech account is particularly concerning, Nick explained, displaying financial transfers that showed client funds being diverted through multiple shell companies before reaching their intended investments. These transactions required senior partner approval. According to firm protocol, that would be either you or Daniel. Walter studied the documents, his expression darkening. These authorizations appear to have my signature, but I never approved these specific transfers. This is the first I'm seeing these routing structures. Are you suggesting Daniel forged your signature? I asked directly. Walter hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications. I'm saying I don't recall approving these specific transaction structures. Daniel often handled the Rainier account personally. They were his client originally. But you were responsible for oversight, Nick pressed. These diversions have been occurring for nearly 3 years. Walter removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. You have to understand how the firm operates. Daniel and I have different client portfolios. We trust each other to manage our respective accounts according to firm standards. Micromanagement would be both inefficient and potentially damaging to client relationships. I leaned forward. Trust is exactly the issue, Walter. Daniel betrayed my trust completely. Is it so difficult to believe he might have done the same to you? The question hung in the air, forcing Walter to confront the possibility that his business partner of 12 years had been systematically undermining the firm's integrity. His shoulders slumped slightly, the first crack in his carefully maintained facade. There were concerns, he admitted reluctantly. Small discrepancies in quarterly reports, unusual patterns in certain account activities. When I raised these issues, Daniel always had plausible explanations. Market fluctuations, timing differences in transaction settlements, client-requested structures for tax purposes. And you accepted these explanations without verification? Nick's tone held no accusation, merely professional curiosity. Walter's expression hardened. Daniel built this firm with me from nothing. We've weathered market crashes, regulatory changes, and aggressive competition. The idea that he would jeopardize everything we've built was simply inconceivable. Yet here we are, I observed quietly. Walter turned to me, genuine regret in his eyes. Rebecca, I'm truly sorry. For whatever it's worth, I believe Daniel was devoted to you. He spoke of you with pride, showcased your design achievements to clients, insisted on including you in key firm events. None of us suspected. That's what makes betrayal effective, Walter, I replied evenly. The careful cultivation of appearances. The conversation shifted to more practical matters, the potential impact on the firm's clients, the upcoming Thompson merger, regulatory implications. Walter gradually moved from defensive posturing to pragmatic damage control, recognizing that cooperation offered his best path forward. What happens now? He asked finally, looking between Nick and me. Nick outlined the immediate legal steps: forensic, audits of firm accounts, interviews with key personnel, potential discussions with regulatory agencies. Walter listened grimly, nodding occasionally, the full magnitude of the situation clearly sinking in. And the merger? Walter asked, his primary concern evident. Depends on what we find, Nick replied candidly. If your involvement was truly limited to negligent oversight rather than active participation, the merger might proceed with appropriate disclosures and safeguards. I added my own perspective. Walter, I have no desire to destroy the firm or your reputation. My concern is securing what's rightfully mine and ensuring Daniel faces appropriate consequences for his actions. Walter studied me for a long moment. You know, Rebecca, Daniel always said you were the reasonable one in your relationship, the level-headed partner who balanced his more aggressive tendencies. He shook his head slightly. I suspect he underestimated you in many ways. Most men do, I replied simply. As the meeting concluded, Walter made a final request. I'd appreciate the chance to address our employees before this becomes public. They deserve to hear directly from leadership. Nick and I exchanged glances, silently, evaluating the request. That seems reasonable, Nick agreed cautiously, provided no information is shared that might compromise the investigation. Walter nodded gratefully. Thank you, And Rebecca. For what it's worth, I always thought you were too good for him. The comment caught me off guard. Not because of the sentiment itself, but because it suggested Walter had seen aspects of Daniel's character that he'd chosen to overlook or accept. It raised new questions about the dynamics within the firm and the extent of Walter's willful blindness. As we left the building, Nick appeared satisfied with the outcome. Walter's cooperation will be valuable. He's obviously prioritizing the firm's survival over loyalty to Daniel. Do you believe him? I asked. About not knowing the extent of Daniel's activities? Nick considered carefully. Partially. I think he suspected more than he acknowledged but deliberately avoided confirmation. Classic willful blindness. Legally problematic, but emotionally understandable. I checked my watch, nearly noon, with 3 hours before Linda Green's visit. I need to stop by Emerald Interiors. My team deserves an update on what's happening. My design studio occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in Pioneer Square, its industrial bones softened by thoughtful interventions, exposed brick walls complemented by warm wood finishes, original steel windows restored to maximize natural light. The space reflected my design philosophy, honoring history while embracing contemporary function. Maya met me at the elevator, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. Rebecca, we've been so worried. The rumors are everywhere. I know, I replied, walking with her toward my office. That's why I'm here. The team deserves facts, not speculation. The studio fell silent as I entered, 16 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. These people weren't just employees. They were collaborators, confidants, and in many cases friends. They'd attended my anniversary parties, collaborated with Daniel on firm events, celebrated our joint successes. I took a deep breath. I'm sure you've all heard various rumors about my personal situation. Rather than let speculation continue, I wanted to share what I can directly. For the next 20 minutes, I provided a carefully edited version of recent events, acknowledging the impending divorce and legal proceedings while avoiding specific details that might compromise the investigation. I emphasized that Emerald Interiors remained financially sound and operationally independent from Daniel's issues. The most important thing, I concluded, is that our clients understand this situation will not affect our ability to deliver exceptional design services. If anyone receives questions or concerns, please direct them to me personally. The team responded with unanimous support, several stepping forward with offers of personal assistance beyond professional responsibilities. Maya organized an impromptu lunch delivery, creating space for individual conversations as the group dispersed into smaller clusters. Rachel Winters, my senior designer who had been with me since the company's earliest days, pulled me aside. I always wondered about Daniel and Vanessa, she admitted quietly. The way he looked at her during the holiday party last year, it wasn't professional. Why didn't you say something? I asked, more curious than accusatory. Rachel's expression reflected genuine discomfort. Because I wasn't certain and because she hesitated. Because powerful men often look at younger women that way without acting on it. I didn't want to raise concerns based solely on a look. Her reasoning echoed my own self-deception, the willing dismissal of warning signs to maintain a comfortable status quo. How many others had noticed what I'd refused to see? By the time I returned to the downtown apartment, Linda Green was already waiting in the lobby. 15 minutes early, characteristic of her meticulous punctuality. She rose as I approached, extending her hand with the formal professionalism that had made her such an effective executive assistant. "Rebecca, thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice carrying the slight southern cadence that 20 years in Seattle had failed to erase. "I've been wrestling with this decision since I left the firm." In my apartment, Linda declined refreshments, preferring to address her purpose directly. From her structured leather tote, she withdrew a flash drive and a bound notebook. "When I was pushed out," she began, placing both items on the coffee table between us. I knew something wasn't right. 30 years as an executive assistant teaches you to recognize patterns, changes in behavior, inconsistencies in explanations, subtle shifts in priorities. You kept records, I observed, eyeing the notebook. Linda nodded. Force of habit. Dates, times, unusual requests, contradictions in schedules. She touched the flash drive. And copies of correspondence that concerned me, though I was careful never to access anything marked confidential or privileged. What made you decide to share this now? I asked carefully. Linda's expression hardened. Last night, Daniel called me. After 2 years of no contact whatsoever, he suddenly needed to clear up some misunderstandings about my departure. Offered me a consulting position with extremely generous compensation. Her laugh held no humor. He's desperately trying to control the narrative. I picked up the notebook, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical. This could be significant for the investigation. That's my hope, Linda confirmed. There's one other thing you should know. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to share. Vanessa wasn't Daniel's first. Indiscretion. There was a pattern, particularly during business trips. Nothing long-term until her, but definitely a pattern. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, yet somehow it did. Despite everything I'd discovered, part of me had still been clinging to the belief that Daniel's betrayal with Vanessa represented a singular failure rather than a fundamental character trait. Did Walter know? I asked, suddenly recalling his parting comment about Daniel. Walter suspected, Linda confirmed. He once asked me to reschedule a business dinner because the client was bringing his daughter, said Daniel didn't need the distraction. His exact words. Another layer of deception revealed, not just financial fraud or a single affair, but a pattern of behavior known to at least some in Daniel's professional circle. People who had smiled at me during firm events, included me in social gatherings, all while carrying knowledge of my husband's infidelities. Linda seemed to read my thoughts. For what it's worth, I don't think most people knew. Daniel was extremely careful, and most indiscretions happened out of town. She hesitated. I considered telling you several times, but without concrete proof. You made the calculation most people would, I assured her. Between a powerful man's denial and a difficult truth, the path of least resistance is usually silence. After Linda left, I spent hours reviewing her materials. The notebook documented 3 years of subtle anomalies, unexplained schedule changes, conflicting travel explanations, unusual expenses attributed to client development. The flash drive contained email exchanges that, while not explicitly incriminating, revealed patterns of deception when cross-referenced with other records. I was still processing this information when my phone rang. Stephanie, her voice unusually tense. Becca, turn on King 5 News, now. I scrambled for the remote, switching to the local news broadcast already in progress. The headline banner froze me in place. Seattle financial advisor Daniel Mitchell under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. The camera showed Daniel being escorted from Mitchell and Taylor's offices by plainclothes officers, his expression set in grim defiance, as reporters shouted questions. The accompanying story outlined allegations of financial misconduct involving client funds, with unnamed sources suggesting the investigation had expanded to include tax evasion and potential fraud. How did this get out? I asked Stephanie, still watching the coverage in disbelief. Nick's investigating, but the timing suggests it came from inside the firm, probably after Walter's meeting with the staff. The broadcast shifted to file footage of Daniel and me at a charity gala last year, the narrator describing our 15-year marriage and my successful design business. Then, most jarringly, a photograph of Daniel and Vanessa at a restaurant, their body language clearly intimate despite the professional setting. The scandal reportedly involves Mitchell's long-term relationship with his executive assistant, Vanessa Porter, who is now believed to have fled to Canada as investigations intensified, the reporter continued. Sources close to the investigation suggest millions in client funds may have been diverted through elaborate financial structures. I muted the broadcast, suddenly needing silence to process the rapid escalation of events. The private matter had become public spectacle with dizzying speed, transforming my personal trauma into breaking news fodder. My phone began lighting, up with notifications, text messages, emails, social media alerts, all responding to the sudden public exposure of my private nightmare. Among them, a message from Daniel. "I'm sorry you're finding out this way. This isn't what I wanted. Please, talk to me before things get worse." The audacity of his concern, as if the public revelation, not his actions, constituted the true betrayal, ignited a fresh wave of anger. This, too, was manipulation, an attempt to position himself as a victim of circumstances rather than the architect of his own destruction. Nick called seconds later, his voice tight with controlled fury. "We're tracking the source of the leak. Initial indications point to someone within the regulatory agencies, possibly tipped by Walter's statements to his staff." "Does it matter? Now?" I asked, watching footage of Daniel being placed in an unmarked police vehicle. "The story's out there." "It affects our strategy," Nick explained. "Public exposure changes everything. The court proceedings, potential settlements, even the criminal investigation dynamics." As we discussed implications, my call waiting beeped with Walter Thompson's number. I switched over, curious about his perspective on the rapidly unfolding situation. "Rebecca? I swear I had nothing to do with this going public," Walter began without preamble, his voice strained. "After our meeting, I informed key personnel about potential irregularities, requiring investigation, but explicitly instructed everyone to maintain confidentiality." "Someone clearly didn't follow instructions," I observed neutrally. Walter's frustration was palpable. One of the junior partners resigned immediately after our meeting, Eric Williams. He was close to Daniel, worked directly on several of the flagged accounts. The timing suggests he might have contacted the authorities or media. Eric Williams, Daniel's protege, a 30-something financial whiz recruited from Goldman Sachs 3 years ago. I'd met him at firm events, noting his almost worshipful attitude toward Daniel. His abrupt resignation suggested either self-preservation or, perhaps more interestingly, a sense of betrayal by his mentor. After ending the call with Walter, I returned to Nick, sharing this latest development. Eric Williams might be worth talking to. If he felt betrayed by Daniel, he might provide valuable information. "Already on it," Nick confirmed. "Our investigator located him at his Belltown apartment. He's agreed to meet tomorrow morning." I glanced back at the television, now showing aerial footage of our Lake Washington home with superimposed graphics estimating its value. The violation felt profound, not just of privacy but of safety, transforming my sanctuary into a visual prop for public consumption. "I can't stay at either property tonight," I realized aloud. "The media will be staking out both locations." "Already arranged," Nick assured me. "Reservation at the Four Seasons under a different name. Private entrance. Security aware of the situation. Stephanie's on her way to help you pack essentials." As the sun set over Elliott Bay, casting long shadows across the apartment, I stood at the window watching Seattle transform from workday bustle to evening illumination. Somewhere out there, Daniel was likely being processed at a federal holding facility, his carefully constructed world disintegrating around him. I should have felt vindicated, even triumphant. Instead, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief that the truth was finally exposed, anger at the public invasion of my privacy, and an unexpected undercurrent of grief for the life I had believed in for 15 years. My phone buzzed with another message. Not Daniel this time, but Vanessa. "They've frozen everything," I'm stranded with nothing. Daniel promised this couldn't happen. We need to talk. I have information you'll want. This isn't what you think. I showed the message to Stephanie when she arrived 30 minutes later, her expression darkening as she read it. Classic triangulation, she observed, helping me pack an overnight bag. She's trying to drive a wedge, positioning herself as another victim rather than an active participant. Should I respond? I asked, genuinely uncertain. Stephanie considered, carefully. Show it to Nick first. There might be legal implications to any communication with her now that criminal charges are likely. As we prepared to leave, a final message arrived from Linda Green. Just saw the news. You should know there's a storage unit in Bellevue registered under Daniel's mother's maiden name. Unit 247 at Eastside Secure Storage. He mentioned it once when he thought I wasn't listening. Said it contained insurance if things ever went sideways. I forwarded the message to Nick with a brief note. Another lead to investigate. Worth checking immediately? His response was instantaneous. On it. Meet you at the hotel. Don't talk to anyone, especially media. The gravity of the situation struck me anew as Stephanie and I took the service elevator to the building's parking garage. In just 5 days, my life had transformed completely. From successful designer and seemingly happy wife to central figure in a financial scandal making headlines across the Pacific Northwest. Yet beneath the chaos and public scrutiny, I felt an unexpected clarity emerging. For years, I had lived in a carefully constructed reality designed primarily by Daniel. His ambitions, his timeline, his definitions of success. Now, standing amid the wreckage of that fabricated life, I could finally begin to envision something entirely new. Something authentically mine. The Four Seasons Presidential Suite offered panoramic views of Elliott Bay, the Olympic Mountains, fading into twilight beyond the shimmering water. I stood at the window, watching ferries cross the Sound while Stephanie arranged security protocols with the hotel management. The luxury that had once felt normal now seemed strangely hollow, as beautiful shell housing uncomfortable truths. My phone vibrated with a text from Nick. Storage unit contained documentation, offshore account records, and extensive cash reserves. Investigators securing everything now. We'll update in the morning. Another piece of Daniel's contingency. Planning revealed, a physical backup to complement his digital preparations. The meticulous nature of his deception continued to astonish me. While I'd been designing homes and building my business, he'd been constructing elaborate escape routes, hidden caches, and alternative identities. It was like discovering I'd been married to a spy rather than a financial advisor. Securities. Arranged, Stephanie announced, joining me at the window. The hotel has implemented privacy protocols, no acknowledgement you're staying here, restricted elevator access, and staff confidentiality agreements. Seems excessive, I murmured, still watching the distant ferries. Turn on the TV, Stephanie suggested gently. I did, immediately understanding her concern. Local news had escalated their coverage, with side-by-side photos of Daniel and me, labeled Financial Power Couple's Spectacular Fall. The coverage had expanded beyond Daniel's arrest to include speculation about my knowledge or involvement, questions about our properties and lifestyle, even aerial footage of the San Juan house with commentators discussing its estimated value. They're treating this like some kind of Seattle society scandal, I said, muting the broadcast in disgust. Because it is, Stephanie replied pragmatically. Successful financial advisor, prominent interior designer, hidden affairs, diverted? Millions! It has all the elements the public loves to dissect. She was right, of course. In Seattle's relatively small business community, Daniel and I had achieved a certain visibility, attending the right charity galas, supporting prestigious arts organizations, appearing occasionally in local lifestyle magazines featuring our perfect partnership of finance and design. That carefully cultivated image now provided irresistible dramatic contrast to the scandal's reality. My phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Rebecca Mitchell?" a female voice asked briskly. "Eliza Wong from the Seattle Times. I was hoping to get your perspective on today's developments regarding your husband's arrest." I ended the call immediately, then powered off my phone entirely. The media barrage had begun, and nothing I could say would serve my interests at this point. Stephanie ordered room service while I showered, the hot water providing temporary relief from the day's tension. I emerged to find a bottle of wine open and dinner arranged on the suite's dining table. "Eat," Stephanie instructed firmly. "You've barely had anything all day." I managed a few bites, more to appease her concern than from actual appetite. "What happens tomorrow?" I asked, the question encompassing far more than our immediate plans. "Practically speaking, you meet with Nick at 9, then Eric Williams at 11. The forensic accountants want to review findings with you at 2. Stephanie refilled our wine glasses. "Beyond that, we start rebuilding." "Rebuilding what?" "My marriage is destroyed, my privacy invaded, my judgment publicly questioned." I gestured toward the muted television, still cycling through images of Daniel being escorted by federal agents. "What exactly am I supposed to rebuild from this wreckage?" Stephanie regarded me steadily. "Your life, Becca. Not the life, Daniel. Constructed for you, or the one you built around him, but something entirely yours." The simplicity of her statement silenced me. For 15 years, I'd defined myself partially through the prism of my marriage. Not in a dependent way, but as half of a partnership that shaped major life decisions, social connections, and future plans. That framework had now disintegrated, leaving unlimited possibilities that felt simultaneously liberating and terrifying. Sleep proved elusive that night. I lay awake watching Seattle's skyline, the city's lights blurring through unshed tears. Not tears of grief precisely, but of release. The emotional pressure of the past week finally finding expression in the privacy of darkness. Dawn brought a text from Nick on the hotel's secure phone. News coverage intensifying. Daniel being arraigned this morning. Vanessa located in Vancouver, Canadian authorities cooperating. I ordered coffee and seated myself at the suite's desk, opening my laptop to begin the process of practical reconstruction. First, a carefully worded email to my Emerald Interiors team. Team, as you've likely seen, personal and legal circumstances have created significant media attention. To minimize disruption to our clients and projects, I'll be working remotely for the immediate future. Maya will coordinate on-site responsibilities, and I remain fully available via email and video conference. Our work continues without interruption. Client confidentiality and project excellence remain our priorities. Thank you for your continued professionalism and support. Rebecca. Next, a separate message to my 3 largest current clients, acknowledging the situation while reassuring them of Emerald Interiors' stability and my continued commitment to their projects. The careful wording took over an hour, each sentence balanced between necessary transparency and professional boundaries. By 9, I was seated in a private conference room at Nick's firm, reviewing the latest developments. The storage unit discovery had significantly strengthened the case against Daniel, providing physical evidence of intentional financial concealment. The arraignment was scheduled for 11, with bail likely to be contested given his demonstrated flight risk. "What about Vanessa?" I asked, studying the preliminary evidence inventory from the storage unit. "Canadian authorities have her under surveillance while extradition details are arranged," Nick explained. "She's made no attempt to leave Vancouver, which suggests either limited resources or a strategic decision to appear cooperative. Or she's waiting for Daniel to fix things," I suggested. Her text last night implied she still believes he might have contingency plans we haven't discovered. Nick nodded thoughtfully. "Possible. Their relationship dynamics weren't necessarily equal partners. She might genuinely believe he'll somehow extract them both from this situation. Our attention turned to financial matters. The court had granted emergency motions freezing all identified assets pending investigation, including the properties in Phoenix, Whistler, San Juan, and Chicago. The Lake Washington house and downtown condo remained accessible to me but were subject to ongoing documentation requirements. "What about my business?" I asked, my primary professional concern. Emerald Interiors operates independently, but Daniel occasionally provided design consultation for office spaces related to his clients. "We've established clear separation," Nick assured me. "The forensic accountants confirmed your company maintained proper financial boundaries. There's no evidence Daniel diverted funds through Emerald Interiors or that your business benefited from his financial activities." Relief washed through me. My professional reputation had been built over 15 years of disciplined work, innovative design, and ethical business practices. While my personal judgment might be questioned, my professional integrity remained intact. At 11, Eric Williams arrived, younger than I remembered from firm events, his usual polished appearance now rumpled and tense. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, clearly uncomfortable meeting with his former mentor's wife. "Mr. Williams, thank you for agreeing to talk with us," Nick began diplomatically. "Your insights into the firm's operations could be valuable to the investigation." Eric nodded jerkily. I had no choice. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't be part of it anymore. "What pattern specifically alerted you?" I asked gently. Eric's expression reflected genuine distress. "It started with the Anderson Tech account last year. Daniel asked me to structure their portfolio using unusual routing protocols, offshore entities, multiple transfer points. When I questioned the approach, he explained it as tax optimization for a particularly sensitive client. But you became suspicious," Nick prompted. "6 months ago, I noticed similar structures being implemented across multiple client accounts, all handled personally by Daniel or routed through Vanessa for processing." Eric's voice strengthened with professional indignation. "The patterns were too consistent, too carefully designed to appear legitimate while obscuring the actual fund flow." "Did you confront Daniel?" I asked. Eric nodded, avoiding my gaze. 3 weeks ago, he laughed it off, said I was being paranoid, that everything was approved by compliance. When I insisted on documentation, he suggested I was overworked, offered me an extended vacation. The timeline aligned perfectly. 3 weeks ago was when Daniel had accelerated his preparations, likely recognizing that Eric's questions threatened his carefully constructed scheme. The vacation offer had been an attempt to remove a potential whistleblower until final arrangements were complete. "What made you resign yesterday?" Nick asked. "Walter's announcement about irregularities," Eric replied. The accounts he mentioned were exactly the ones I'd flagged to Daniel. I knew immediately that whatever was happening had been discovered. He hesitated, finally meeting my eyes directly. "I didn't contact the media, Mrs. Mitchell. I went straight to the SEC and federal prosecutors. They must have been the source of the public disclosure." His sincerity seemed genuine, his distress palpable. Here was another victim of Daniel's manipulations, a young professional whose trust had been exploited, whose career trajectory was now permanently altered by association with a corrupted mentor. "Your cooperation will be noted positively," Nick assured him. "The authorities understand the difference between perpetrators and those who bring evidence forward." After Eric left, we barely had time to process his revelations before my phone buzzed with breaking news alerts. Daniel had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk based on the discovered preparations and attempted escape. The arraignment had revealed additional charges: tax evasion, wire fraud, and misappropriation of client funds estimated at over $12 million. The court sketches showed Daniel in standard-issue jail attire, his usual confident posture noticeably diminished. His attorney's statement claimed misunderstandings and accounting errors rather than intentional fraud, a defense strategy that seemed feeble against the mounting evidence. By afternoon, the forensic accountants had compiled preliminary findings that painted a comprehensive picture of Daniel's financial manipulations. The pattern was clear: systematic diversion of funds through increasingly sophisticated mechanisms, accelerating dramatically over the past 18 months as his relationship with Vanessa intensified. "There's something interesting in the Chicago property documentation," observed Justin, the lead forensic accountant. "The payments don't just cover Melody Porter's living expenses, they also show regular transfers to a senior care facility in Michigan. Vanessa's father, perhaps?" I suggested, recalling vague mentions of family health issues. Justin nodded. "Alzheimer's care, from what we can determine. Extremely expensive facility, comprehensive service package. Monthly charges exceed $12,000. Another dimension of Daniel and Vanessa's relationship revealed: he hadn't merely been funding their future life together, but supporting her family obligations as well. The consideration demonstrated a depth of commitment that somehow made the betrayal more profound. This wasn't just physical attraction or midlife crisis. Daniel had emotionally invested in Vanessa's life comprehensively. As the accounting team continued their presentation, my phone buzzed with another message from an unknown number, a different one this time. "This is Melody Porter. I understand my daughter has created difficulties for you. I had no knowledge of how Vanessa was funding my care. Please believe this." The directness was startling. Vanessa's mother reaching out from the epicenter of scandal to establish her innocence. Whether her claimed ignorance was genuine remained unclear, but her concern about perception was evident. I showed the message to Nick, who added it to our documentation without comment. The investigation was expanding beyond Daniel and Vanessa to include everyone who might have benefited from or facilitated their activities. By late afternoon, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. The emotional strain of the past week, combined with minimal sleep, had depleted my reserves completely. Nick noticed, gently suggesting we adjourn until morning. "There's something else you should consider," he said as we gathered our materials. "The media attention is intensifying. Every Seattle outlet is covering the story, and national financial press is picking it up too. The narrative is forming without your input." "What are you suggesting?" I asked warily. "A controlled statement. Not an interview, just a prepared comment from you or your representative. Something that establishes your position clearly." I considered the suggestion carefully. While professional instinct urged maintaining complete privacy, strategic thinking recognized the value in shaping public perception early. "Draft something," I agreed finally. "Nothing detailed, just a simple statement clarifying that I'm cooperating with authorities and requesting privacy." The hotel suite felt oppressively quiet when I returned, the solitude amplifying thoughts I'd managed to suppress during the day's activities. I ordered room service mechanically, then found myself standing at the window again, watching darkness settle over the city while rain tapped gently against the glass. My phone rang, the hotel's secure line. I answered with caution. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Officer Castillo from the Downtown Detention Center. I have a call request from Daniel." "Mitchell? He's entitled to make calls to his legal representative or spouse. Do you wish to accept?" The question froze me momentarily. Did I want to speak with Daniel? What could he possibly say that would matter now? "Mrs. Mitchell? Are you there?" "Yes," I replied, surprising myself. "I'll accept the call." A series of clicks, then Daniel's voice, strained and unfamiliar in its uncertainty. "Becca, is that you?" "It's me," I confirmed, maintaining emotional neutrality. "Thank you for taking my call." The formal phrasing sounded bizarre coming from the man who had shared my bed for 15 years. "I know you probably hate me right now." "Hate requires emotional investment," I replied evenly. I'm not sure what I feel toward you anymore, Daniel. A long pause followed, punctuated by background noises from the detention facility. I never meant for this to happen, he finally said. Everything just escalated gradually. One decision led to another until suddenly there was no clean way back. Is that supposed to be an explanation or an excuse? I asked. Because neither changes the reality of what you did, not just to me, but to your clients, your partner, your employees. I know, he acknowledged, his voice hollow. But Becca, you have to believe me. I did love you. For most of our marriage, it was real. Vanessa. That happened later, when things were already changing between us. The attempt to rewrite history ignited a flash of genuine anger. Things weren't changing between us, Daniel. You were changing, withdrawing, compartmentalizing, creating space for deception. Don't you dare make this a mutual relationship. Breakdown. That's not what I... Why did you call? I interrupted, suddenly exhausted by the circular manipulation. What do you actually want from me right now? Another pause, longer this time. The San Juan house, he finally said. Let me keep the San Juan house. Everything else, take it all. But that house, it was supposed to be our fresh start. The audacity was breathtaking. After everything he'd done, Daniel was attempting to negotiate for the property most symbolic of his betrayal, the house built from my designs for his future with another woman. Our fresh start? I repeated incredulously. The house you furnished with Vanessa? The house you were fleeing to when you were arrested? That fresh start? You don't understand, Daniel insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. That house was always meant for us, for you and me. The designs were yours because it was supposed to be your dream home. Vanessa was just a complication. The revisionist history was so absurd it almost made me laugh. Goodbye, Daniel, I said quietly. Don't call again unless it's through the attorneys. I hung up, hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. The exchange had provided unexpected clarity. Daniel still believed in his ability to manipulate reality, to reframe his actions, within narratives that minimized his culpability. Even facing criminal charges and the collapse of his professional reputation, his primary concern was securing assets and reshaping perception. My dinner arrived, but I merely picked at it, mind racing with implications from the day's revelations. Around 8, Nick called with an update. The prepared statement had been released to media outlets, and the investigators had secured Vanessa's formal cooperation against Daniel in exchange for consideration regarding her own charges. She's claiming she was manipulated, Nick explained, professional skepticism evident in his tone. Says Daniel presented their financial arrangements as completely legitimate, that she believed the offshore accounts were standard tax mitigation strategies for high-net-worth individuals. Do the investigators believe her? I asked. Partially, Nick admitted. The evidence suggests Daniel was certainly the architect of the more sophisticated financial structures. Vanessa facilitated rather than designed the fraud, still criminal, but potentially mitigated in sentencing. After ending the call, I found myself drawn to my laptop, opening the design files for the San Juan house. The original concepts had been created 3 years ago during a particularly inspired weekend. Sketches and mood boards for the retirement home Daniel and I had discussed building someday. The renderings reflected my aesthetic vision completely, the connection between indoor and outdoor spaces, the careful balance of privacy and openness, the harmonious integration with the natural landscape. Daniel had enthusiastically supported the concept, suggesting refinements that acknowledged his preferences while honoring my overall vision. Now those designs existed in physical form, not as our shared future, but as the setting for a life he'd planned without me. The ultimate creative theft wasn't just financial, but deeply personal. The appropriation of my professional vision for a relationship built on deception. I closed the laptop decisively. Whatever happened with the legal proceedings, assets were eventually distributed through divorce settlements. The San Juan house would never again represent my dream. Its beauty had been permanently corrupted by betrayal, each carefully designed space now haunted by what might have been. Morning brought fresh media coverage, slightly tempered by my released statement. The narrative was shifting subtly from scandal to financial crime story, with increased focus on client impacts and regulatory implications rather than personal relationship dynamics. Nick arrived at the hotel for our scheduled meeting bearing unexpected news. Walter Thompson called this morning. He's proposing a settlement regarding your interests in Mitchell & Taylor Consulting. My interests? I asked, confused. I'm not a partner in the firm. Not directly, Nick agreed, but Washington's community property laws give you claim to Daniel's ownership share, which constitutes 50% of the company. Walter wants to buy out that interest immediately, allowing him to recapitalize and rebuild without the Mitchell name. The offer represented both pragmatic business decision and personal separation. Walter needed to distance the firm from Daniel's actions to survive, while I needed financial security independent of the frozen assets and pending criminal proceedings. What's his proposal? I asked, professional interest engaged despite the circumstances. Nick outlined the terms: a fair valuation of Daniel's partnership share, structured payments to ensure my financial stability regardless of criminal case outcomes, and complete separation from any ongoing liabilities related to the firm's operation, under Daniel's co-management. It's a reasonable offer, Nick acknowledged. Better than we might receive after protracted negotiations, particularly given the firm's reputational damage from recent events. I considered carefully, weighing immediate security against potential longer-term recovery of the firm's value. Counter with accelerated payment schedule and explicit protection against any future claims related to Daniel's actions. If Walter agrees, we'll proceed. Nick nodded approvingly. Smart approach. I'll draft the counteroffer immediately. Our discussion shifted to immediate practical concerns: my living arrangements, business operations, ongoing security considerations. The media focus would eventually diminish, but the interim period required careful management of both public perception and personal safety. I can't keep hiding in hotel rooms, I decided finally. I need to reclaim some normalcy, to be visible, leading my company through this period. The Lake Washington house will be problematic, Nick cautioned. Media presence remains significant, and the property's association with Daniel is too established for comfortable occupation. Not the lake house, I agreed, but I've been considering alternatives. I outlined my developing plan, relocating temporarily to a furnished corporate apartment near my design studio, maintaining regular work hours while minimizing predictable movements, restricting social engagements to essential professional functions. A return to structured routine, Nick observed. Psychologically sound approach. Not just routine, I clarified. Reclamation. Each day I spend paralyzed by Daniel's actions is another day he controls my life. I need to start building something new. By afternoon, the framework for transition was established. Apartment secured, security protocols arranged, business operations streamlined for maximum efficiency with minimal disruption. The practical focus provided welcome distraction from emotional processing, allowing professional capabilities to support personal recovery. Stephanie arrived with dinner and the latest updates from our widening support network. Linda Green had provided additional documentation to investigators, establishing a timeline of Daniel's changing behavior that corroborated financial evidence. Walter had tentatively accepted our counteroffer terms, with formal agreement expected within days. Justin's team had identified several previously unknown accounts, further strengthening the criminal case while expanding recoverable assets. There's something else, Stephanie added hesitantly. Megan Walsh called me today. She's organizing an informal support group, other women affected by the situation, mostly from the firm. She wondered if you might consider joining eventually, once things settle. The suggestion was unexpectedly touching. Recognition that trauma extended beyond financial impacts to include betrayal of trust, questioning of judgment, reassessment of shared experiences. These women had different relationships to the situation, but shared the disorienting experience of discovering that a fundamental aspect of their professional environment had been built on deception. Maybe, I acknowledged, not ready to commit, but appreciating the extended hand. When things settle. As evening deepened into night, Stephanie prepared to leave. "First day back at the office tomorrow," she reminded me. "Want me to come by in the morning?" I shook my head. I need to do this myself. First steps toward whatever comes next. After she left, I packed my belongings methodically, preparing for tomorrow's move to the corporate apartment. Each item, considered, some discarded as too closely associated with my life with Daniel, others retained for practical or personal significance independent of our marriage. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown international number. "Rebecca, this is Vanessa. I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but there's something you should know. The Chicago property wasn't Daniel's idea. It was mine. My mother is dying. Daniel was helping me provide for her and my father. That part was real, whatever else he did. I'm sorry for my role in hurting you." The unexpected glimpse of humanity complicated the narrative I'd been constructing. The calculating other woman, the manipulative husband, the clear villains in contrast to my victimhood. Reality, as always, contained more complexity than convenient categorization allowed. I didn't respond to the message but saved it, acknowledging that understanding might eventually be part of healing, even without forgiveness. Daniel and Vanessa's motivations, however selfish or misguided, existed within human context rather than cartoon villainy. Morning arrived with surprising emotional clarity. As I prepared for my first public appearance since the scandal broke, selecting a structured navy suit that conveyed professional confidence, I realized the paralysis of betrayal had been replaced by something unexpected, a sense of emerging possibility. For 15 years, I had been Rebecca Mitchell, wife of financial advisor Daniel Mitchell. Even while building my own successful career, that identity had shaped countless decisions, relationships, and life directions in ways both obvious and subtle. Its dissolution, while painful, also created space for redefinition. Who was Rebecca Mitchell without Daniel? What values, aspirations, and capabilities existed independent of our partnership? What life might emerge from the wreckage of betrayal? Not as damaged reconstruction, but as original creation. The questions had no immediate answers, but their existence represented a significant shift from shock and reaction toward intentional reconsideration. Each day would bring small decisions, gradual refinements, incremental progress toward whatever came next. My car arrived precisely at 8, not Carlos this time, but a new driver from a security-focused service. As we navigated Seattle's morning, traffic toward my design studio, I watched the familiar cityscape with fresh perspective. The buildings, streets, and landmarks remained unchanged, but my relationship to them had fundamentally altered. Maya greeted me at the studio entrance, professional warmth tinged with genuine concern. "Welcome back," she said simply, falling into step beside me as we entered the workspace. Conversations paused briefly as staff recognized my arrival, then resumed with deliberate normalcy, the greatest gift my team could offer under the circumstances. In my office, I found small touches of support, fresh flowers on the desk, a handwritten note of encouragement signed by each team member, coffee prepared exactly as I preferred. These gestures, unsolicited and heartfelt, provided unexpected, emotional ballast as I settled into my chair and opened my laptop. The day's schedule appeared on screen: client presentations, vendor negotiations, design reviews. Ordinary professional activities continuing despite extraordinary personal circumstances. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the present moment rather than past betrayals or future uncertainties. "Ready for the 9 o'clock meeting?" Maya asked from the doorway, tablet in hand. I nodded, standing with renewed purpose. "Absolutely. Let's begin." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.